This is no exercise. Canada is silently getting ready for a possibility that would have seemed utterly absurd just a handful of years ago: the chance of military friction with the United States. Two key players are heading in starkly different directions. Mark Carney is forging partnerships and strengthening defense structures. Donald Trump is intensifying his statements and advancing policies that are rippling through international relations. What follows isn't guesswork or imagination. It's a chain of actual decisions, concrete funding commitments, and explicit cautions playing out in real time. When you link them together, the emerging reality is considerably more grave than most recognize. Stick around. The further we dig, the more sobering this becomes. Let's lay out the context, because the past 3 days have shifted the landscape entirely. Mark Carney has formally announced a major defense buildup centered on Canada's Arctic and northern regions. We're looking at spending between $25 and $40 billion. This goes well beyond ordinary budget allocations. It represents deliberate strategic alignment and readiness. And it's unfolding simultaneously with Donald Trump repeatedly sharpening his tone toward Canada, calling it a possible 51st state, and openly casting doubt on its independence in ways that have left diplomats worldwide stunned. Stop and consider that pairing for a moment. Here, you have a prominent American political voice directing increasingly forceful language at one of the United States' staunchest partners. At the same time, that partner is dramatically scaling up military resources in the single most geopolitically sensitive area it possesses: the Arctic. This isn't coincidence, it's intentional. Here's why the Arctic carries such weight. It isn't merely frozen wilderness. It holds immense strategic worth, enormous untapped resources, massive energy deposits, and, crucially, emerging sea lanes that could transform worldwide commerce. As polar ice retreats, those passages grow more navigable, granting whoever dominates them significant economic and military advantage. Canada fully grasps this reality. That's precisely why Mark Carney is channeling billions into Arctic-specific defenses, facilities, and monitoring networks. But the stakes rise higher still. This isn't solely a matter of location, it's about self-reliance. For generations, Canada has leaned heavily on the United States for defense collaboration, particularly via structures like NATO. What's now visible is an unmistakable pivot. Canada is indicating it can no longer place complete faith in American steadiness, especially under leadership that appears more volatile. Rather than depending, Canada is fortifying. Rather than assuming, Canada is anticipating. And the steps go beyond bases and northern infrastructure. There's an additional dimension many overlook: space assets, satellite constellations, and secure communication grids. Canada is deliberately working to lessen reliance on foreign providers and develop its own independent orbital capacity. Why is that significant? In contemporary warfare, control of information determines outcomes. The side that owns the satellites owns the channels for communication, positioning, reconnaissance, and precision guidance. Canada is making plain it refuses to leave that dominance solely in another nation's grasp. Timing matters greatly in global affairs, and this defense surge is no accident. It coincides exactly with Donald Trump heightening trade demands, initiating fresh probes into Canadian commerce, and continuing to upend established diplomatic conventions. These aren't separate incidents. They form a consistent sequence of strain, intensification, and unpredictability. That leads to the central question everyone should consider. Why would a traditionally calm nation like Canada, economically interwoven with, culturally close to, and long allied with the United States, suddenly begin bracing for extreme contingencies? Governments don't commit tens of billions to defense without cause. They don't alter core strategic orientation unless they perceive a genuine threat on the horizon. According to various experts and global watchers, what Canada perceives is not certain war but escalating risk. In diplomacy, ambiguity frequently proves more hazardous than outright antagonism. Uncertainty compels countries to ready themselves for every outcome. And that brings us to the most critical takeaway in this opening segment. The issue isn't whether conflict will erupt. It's that a longtime ally now feels compelled to treat the possibility as real enough to warrant massive preparation. That shift alone alters the entire dynamic. Once preparations reach this magnitude, they trigger ripple effects. Partners take notice, financial markets respond, defense staffs revise contingencies, and what previously seemed unthinkable gradually slides into the plausible category. This is only the starting point. In the following part, we'll examine the precise actions Mark Carney is taking privately, the partnerships he's solidifying throughout Europe and Asia, and why this is swiftly evolving from a two-country dispute into a far wider, truly international concern. Now the matter ceases to be purely a Canada-United States issue and begins affecting the broader world stage. While Mark Carney bolsters Canada domestically, he is simultaneously advancing externally at a speed that has drawn worldwide notice. His behind-the-scenes efforts indicate Canada is not acting in isolation. In recent days, Carney hasn't remained solely in Ottawa handling internal matters. He has traveled to pivotal foreign capitals, held discussions with heads of state, reinforced existing ties, and constructed what increasingly resembles an organized security framework. A particularly significant visit took place in Norway, where Carney appeared together with Jonas Gahr Støre and Germany's Friedrich Merz. This was far more than a standard ceremonial gathering. The statements delivered carried a blunt, grave, and unusually candid edge. They spoke plainly about Arctic security, collective protection, and, above all, made clear that any challenge to territorial integrity in that region would face serious consequences. That carries real meaning because the Arctic belongs to no single nation. It constitutes a joint strategic space shared among several countries, many of them NATO members. So when Canada ramps up its military footprint there while simultaneously deepening coordination with Norway and Germany, the message is unmistakable. This transcends national safeguarding. It constitutes coalition-level maneuvering. The discussion didn't remain confined to budgets or drills. It broadened to encompass wider geopolitical strains, including Russia, the situation in Ukraine, and mounting disorder in various theaters. The leaders stressed that pressure on Russia must persist and that easing sanctions would only heighten instability. That stance stands in direct opposition to signals coming from Donald Trump, who has frequently indicated a markedly different posture toward Russia and global disputes. Two distinct paths are therefore emerging. One involves a group of nations tightening bonds, upholding restrictions, and aligning defense efforts. The other reflects an American political direction that questions those same bonds, contests established arrangements, and departs from long-held positions. That growing divide is where friction originates. The outreach isn't limited to Europe. Carney has also been cultivating stronger connections across the Pacific. Recent interactions with partners such as Australia demonstrate that Canada is establishing itself as a link between Atlantic and Pacific security networks. Consider the implication. Canada is moving beyond passive response. It is deliberately helping shape a wider group of like-minded countries. This mirrors the coordination pattern mentioned earlier, yet the tempo has accelerated under mounting strain. Earlier, the emphasis was cooperation. Now, it centers on readiness. Another element often missed is communication itself. The phrasing these leaders choose is deliberate. Terms like safeguarding sovereignty, unacceptable conduct, and united reaction are not offhand remarks. In global diplomacy, such wording is precision engineered. It draws boundaries. It marks non-negotiable lines. One especially pointed exchange occurred when the leaders addressed the notion of one state seizing land from another. The reply came swiftly and without qualification, unacceptable under international norms. No wavering, no vagueness. That clarity reveals a great deal. These figures are not dismissing recent statements as mere rhetoric. They are treating them as developments requiring a substantive response. Step back and absorb the larger pattern taking shape. Canada is pouring tens of billions into Arctic protection. It is diminishing dependence on outside systems. It is reinforcing partnerships spanning Europe and Asia. And those partners are openly endorsing Canada's stance on independence and safety. This is not a solitary actor. This is a nation weaving itself more tightly into a responsive collective that stands prepared to act together if circumstances demand it. That carries profound strategic weight. Should tensions ever move past words, Canada would not stand alone. Any genuine crisis scenario would instantly draw in multiple countries, multiple coalitions, and multiple continents. That interconnectedness is precisely what makes the present moment so delicate. It concerns far more than two nations. It involves the entire web of relationships tied to them. At the same time, Donald Trump keeps exerting leverage through varied avenues, trade inquiries, economic instruments, and public remarks that upend conventional diplomatic practice. Every action layers additional complexity onto the situation. Every utterance heightens ambiguity. And as we've noted, ambiguity is what fuels readiness, because Canada isn't attempting to forecast the precise future. It is ensuring that whatever develops, it won't be taken by surprise. That perspective drives these choices. So when reports surface about defense budgets, alliance discussions, or diplomatic declarations, resist viewing them as disconnected episodes. See them instead as components of a coherent, evolving plan taking form in the present. Now the dynamic shifts again, because the strain between Mark Carney and Donald Trump isn't growing only through defense posture and coalition building. It is being actively intensified by something even more urgent and destabilizing: economic leverage. This is where events are accelerating. In recent days, Trump has intensified commercial measures against Canada in a manner that is generating deep concern among economists, legal scholars, and decision-makers. We're not discussing standard tariff disputes. We're describing forceful application of American trade statutes to launch inquiries and threaten penalties aimed at one of its most integrated economic neighbors. Here's the current picture. Following court setbacks to previous tariff approaches, Trump has pivoted to alternative legal mechanisms, including clauses that permit short-term duties and expansive probes into claimed unfair conduct. On the surface, these provisions exist for defined purposes. Critics contend they are now being extended well past their intended scope, and Canada sits squarely in the target zone. From Ottawa's viewpoint, this transcends ordinary trade policy. It constitutes strategic coercion intended to extract compromises. When that pressure merges with confrontational political language, the perception changes. It no longer resembles bargaining. It begins resembling compulsion. Pause here. This distinction is vital. Contemporary rivalries don't invariably open with armed clashes. They frequently commence with economic conflict. Duties, import curbs, supply line interruptions, those instruments can erode a counterpart's strength without a single weapon discharged, and they regularly lay groundwork for more serious confrontations. That explains why Mark Carney's response looks the way it does. When viewed through this framework, Canada's actions become logical. Reinforcing Arctic defenses secures land. Constructing autonomous satellite networks safeguards information flow. Broadening alliances preserves diplomatic influence. Strengthening economic resilience maintains overall stability. It forms a comprehensive multi-domain strategy. Yet the complexity deepens further. The legal basis for these trade steps is already under scrutiny. Observers highlight that certain tools carry rigid constraints, time limits, evidentiary thresholds. Failure to satisfy those requirements invites litigation domestically within the U.S. and through international forums. Picture the consequence: parallel disputes unfolding across economic, judicial, political, and possibly military arenas, all linked, all feeding into one another. Layer on public attitudes. Within Canada, a rising awareness, not hysteria, but clear recognition, is taking hold that the U.S. relationship has entered uncharted waters. Politicians, commentators, and ordinary people are starting to pose questions once considered unimaginable. What happens if friction keeps growing? What if economic strain tightens? What if readiness proves justified? Those questions carry weight because popular opinion shapes government choices. Inside the United States, the framing differs sharply. Trump's backers regard these steps as displays of resolve, bargaining tools, efforts to correct imbalanced trade arrangements, and confront perceived inequities. To that audience, this isn't escalation. It's rebalancing. You therefore have two fundamentally opposed readings of identical conduct. One camp perceives self-defense, the other perceives aggression. One sees precaution, the other sees intimidation. When each believes it is merely reacting rather than provoking, controlling the spiral grows much harder because neither accepts responsibility for the mounting strain. That's where danger compounds. Each additional duty, each new inquiry, each fresh declaration introduces more tension into an already taut partnership. Over time, accumulated tension generates heat. Sufficient heat eventually forces something to give way. Business communities are monitoring intently. Cross-border supply networks between Canada and the United States are profoundly intertwined. Sectors including cars, energy, farming, and tech rely on fluid exchange. Interrupt that flow and consequences spread rapidly, price changes, employment impacts, market movements. Once real economic pain emerges, political pressure surges on both sides. A self-reinforcing cycle thus takes shape. Economic measures spark political backlash triggers intensified economic countermeasures, and the entire loop amplifies the wider discord. This has moved beyond rhetoric or planning. It now possesses momentum, and momentum, once established, resists reversal. That leads directly into the next pivotal chapter. In the coming segment, we will explore how the rest of the world is perceiving this development, how major actors are responding, how coalitions are realigning, and why this may mark the early stage of a profound global strategic reordering that extends well beyond Canada and the United States. Now, the issue stretches far past North America and begins altering the worldwide landscape. The friction between Mark Carney and Donald Trump is no longer regarded merely as a neighborly disagreement. The international community is paying close attention, and crucially, it is beginning to adapt. Leading powers are not remaining passive observers. They are assessing, measuring risks, and in certain instances, discreetly repositioning themselves for potential developments. Consider Europe first. Nations such as Germany, France, and the Nordic states already maintain extensive defense and economic links with Canada. Yet the sense of priority has shifted. European capitals are increasingly viewing this not as a routine ally-to-ally quarrel, but as a possible crack in the broader Western security architecture. That prospect alarms them, because for generations that architecture has rested on mutual confidence, foreseeable policy, and unified action, most visibly through NATO. Should that reliability erode, Europe must rethink its own protection. That rethinking is underway. Rather than counting on continuity, European countries are bracing for inconsistency, deepening internal unity, solidifying bonds with partners like Canada, and ensuring the system remains functional even if one element grows unsteady. Turn now to Asia. Countries throughout the Indo-Pacific are likewise watching attentively. States including Japan, South Korea, and Australia depend on reliable global commerce and dependable security ties. Rising strain between the United States and Canada prompts a basic concern: how durable is the existing international framework? When that doubt surfaces, nations begin hedging. They pursue additional partnerships. They reinforce current ones. They draft backup arrangements. Here, Mark Carney's approach gains added importance. By cultivating connections across both Europe and Asia, Canada places itself as a linking element, a steadying presence that binds disparate regions together amid growing uncertainty. The picture grows still more intricate. Powers outside the traditional Western orbit are observing closely too, and they perceive openings. Heightened discord among the United States and its partners creates breathing room for expanded sway, room for fresh alignments, room to reshape international arrangements in previously unavailable ways. Geopolitical transitions frequently occur exactly like this, not always via open warfare, but through steady repositioning. Reflect on what that implies. Should countries start forming more cohesive regional clusters, Europe tightening internally, Asia reinforcing its own circuits, nations like Canada forging trans-regional links, the global structure tilts toward greater fragmentation, with authority spread among several poles rather than anchored in one dominant center. Analysts label that shift multipolarity. Whether widely acknowledged or not, episodes like the present one are how such transformations quietly begin. Meanwhile, Donald Trump's language continues to depart from conventional diplomatic restraint. Comments concerning independence, borders, and partnerships are no longer wrapped in the measured phrasing that normally characterizes global discourse. They are more blunt, more adversarial, more volatile. That volatility is precisely what unsettles other capitals. When a leading power's behavior becomes difficult to anticipate, prudent states must plan for a range of futures: favorable, adverse, and every shade between. That explains the quiet uptick in defense allocations, the reevaluation of trade reliance, and the expansion of diplomatic relationships beyond traditional circles. These moves aren't responses to one isolated occurrence. They address an observable pattern, a pattern hinting that the underlying rules may be changing. Here lies the unifying insight of this segment. The situation is no longer confined. It originated in words. It progressed to economic measures. It advanced into military readiness. Now it is actively influencing worldwide alignments. That constitutes escalation through stages. Once a dynamic reaches this breadth, unwinding it becomes far more challenging. Too many parties are engaged, too many stakes are exposed, too many choices have already been locked in. Although attention remains fixed on Canada and the United States, the true scope is vastly larger. This concerns how countries behave when confidence begins to fray. It concerns how partnerships evolve under stress. And it concerns how rapidly the international equilibrium can tilt when uncertainty gains the upper hand. And that leads us to the concluding and most consequential section.